Hello, everybody. Great to be with you on a Friday, Erev Shabbos. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house on a Friday? It's skipping on me. Bella in Florida, Joe in the Inland Empire, Bella in Texas, Shandor in the Bronx. Yehud in South Carolina, Lorraine in Texas, Karen in Northern California, Renee in Indiana, Chaim in Florida, Franco in Trieste. Welcome, everybody. Very short daf today, and I would have done a double, but it's Friday. We're all super busy. So let's just do a short daf and cover it well. We are opening chapter 5 here in Tractate Avoda Zara, the 27th volume of the Talmud. Mishna number 1 in chapter 5. Remember, these are the laws of Avoda Zara, the laws of idolatry, the very, very stringent prohibition against idolatry, the accessories of idolatry, the products of idolatry, and as we'll see today, even the sort of downstream exchanges of things that were used in idolatry, also going to be rendered prohibited. Mishnah 1 in chapter 5, top of 62a. In the case of a Gentile who hires a Jewish laborer to work with wine that is then used for an idolatrous libation with him, so then his wage, the Jew's wage, becomes forbidden, i.e. it is prohibited for the Jew to derive benefit from his wage. Why would he take the job? Well, maybe he didn't know that the wine was going to be used as a libation. He didn't even know what kind of work he was going to be doing. But then he found out as he was doing the work, sadly, that the work was going to produce wine used as a libation for idolaters. And that's going to render even his wage prohibited to him. The wage is forbidden, i.e. it is prohibited for the Jew to derive benefit from his wage. If, however, the Gentile hired him to do other work with him, even if he said to him while he was working with him, transport the barrel of wine used for a libation from me from this place to that place, then his wage is permitted, i.e. the Jew is permitted to derive benefit from the money because his work wasn't only for the benefit of idolatry, of a libation used in idolatry. I guess you couldn't separate which part was used for what. He was just there working that day, and so he could keep the wage as long as it wasn't only for that. With regard to a Gentile who rents a Jew's donkey to carry wine used for a libation on it, its rental fee is forbidden. If he rented it to sit on it, even if a Gentile placed his jug of wine that was used for a libation on the donkey, its rental fee is permitted. That's the Mishnah. Let's move on to the Gemara. In the first case of the Mishnah, where a Gentile hires a Jew to produce wine that is used for a libation, right? Meaning an idolatrous libation, along with the Gentile. So then what is the reason that the Jew's wage is forbidden to him? If we say that since it is prohibited to derive benefit from wine that is used for a libation, and therefore his wage is also prohibited, that creates a halachic problem. To what end? What are we saying? What do we mean? There are the cases of orlah produce, right? So that we Jews cannot benefit from the fruit of a fruit tree for the first 3 years of that tree. Only in the 4th year can we start benefiting from the fruit of a fruit tree, the 4th year of the life of that fruit tree. So there are the cases of orlah produce, i.e. produce grown during a tree's first 3 years, and kilayim, the diverse kinds planted in a vineyard, from which it is also prohibited to derive benefit, right? If wheat is planted in a vineyard, that violates a written prohibition in the Torah, and so we can't benefit from that wheat. So how is this going to be relevant to the wage of a Jew who worked with an idolater who produced wine for a libation? The way it's going to be relevant is the fruit is prohibited, and you're not permitted to derive benefit from it. But if you sold that fruit anyway, and then you used the money for something that has Jewish legal significance, if that, as they're going to describe, using it to betroth the woman, and the woman is indeed betrothed, that would suggest that even though the orlah is prohibited, money that was exchanged for it isn't necessarily prohibited. So why couldn't the Jew? He shouldn't have been working for an idolater who then made wine that was used for libation. Or perhaps the Jew didn't know that was going to happen, then he found himself in that situation. But once the wage was paid, doesn't it somehow become his anyway? And he should be permitted to keep it based on, by analogy, the fruit from the orlah tree. So let's keep reading. So there are the cases of orlah and kilayim, right? Fruit from the orlah, from the first 3 years of the tree, or grow, some like wheat planted in a vineyard, from which it is also prohibited to derive benefit. And yet, we learned in a Mishna, Tractate Kedushin 56b, that if a man sold this produce and he betrothed the woman with the money that he received for it, she is in fact betrothed. So if the money is so prohibited that a Jew can have nothing to do with it, and yet he used it to betroth the woman, which has to have some kind of exchange of something valuable, just as a legal matter. He's not purchasing her, but he has to give her something that can make the betrothal official. So then why is the betrothal valid if such money is prohibited? Evidently, money gained from a forbidden item is not itself forbidden, as otherwise the betrothal would not take effect. So rather, perhaps the reason that the wage of this Jew who worked for a Gentile who produced idolatrous wine, the reason that the wage is forbidden is since the wine used for a libation transfers to the money its status as an object of idolatry, we're going to have a much more stringent ruling. But the Gemara challenges this reasoning and says, but there is the law of the sabbatical year produce, which transfers its sanctity to the money with which it is redeemed. And yet we learned in a Mishnah in Tractate Shavias 8.4, with regard to one who says to his laborer during the sabbatical year, right, the produce every 7 years when the temple is standing, and we have a Torah sovereign nation in Israel, so we have to let the fields go fallow every 7 years. The produce in those fields acquires a kind of shmittah or sabbatical sanctity, and so you can't use it. And if you do use it and sell it, then that money is going to become permitted or prohibited. Let's see. The Gemara challenges, but there is the halacha of the sabbatical year produce, which transfers its sanctity to the money with which it is redeemed. And yet, we learned in a Mishnah, with regard to one who says to his laborer during the sabbatical year, here is the dinar that I give to you, gather for me vegetables for its value today. His wage is forbidden, i.e. the sanctity of the sabbatical year produce is transferred to the wage, since it is as though he has purchased sabbatical year produce in exchange for the dinar. But if the employer says to him, gather for me vegetables today, without mentioning that it is for the value of the dinar, then his wage is permitted, as he merely paid him for his labor, not specifically to gather prohibited produce that is sanctified by the shmittah year. Now, this should apply as well to the case of the wine used for the libation. If the Jew was knowingly working in the production of wine of a Gentile that's going to be used for a libation, okay, then his wage should be prohibited. But if he was hired just to do some work, and then it turned out that the work produced wine of a libation, used as an idolatrous libation, he should be able to keep his salary, keep his wage under this same kind of reasoning. And yet we don't find that. So Rabbi Abahu says, and Rabbi Yochanan says, with regard to this wage of the Jewish worker who was involved in production of idolatrous wine, this is a penalty that the sages imposed upon donkey drivers with regard to wine used for a libation. And the Gemara explains, with regard to wine used for a libation, right, idolatrous libation, the penalty is, as we said, that the wage of one who is hired to work in the production of wine that is used for a libation is forbidden, right? And they don't specify whether he knew he was going to do that or not. With regard to donkey drivers, what is this penalty? The penalty is, as it is taught in a Baraisa, with regard to donkey drivers who are working in the transportation of sabbatical year produce, their wage is sabbatical year produce. So the Gemara asks, what does it mean when it says that their wage is sabbatical year produce? If we say that we give them their wage for their work from sabbatical year produce, well, then the employer consequently is paying his debt from sabbatical year produce. And this violates that which the Torah states. And the sabbatical year produce of the land, the sabbatical produce of the land, shall be for food for you. You can eat it, but you can't buy and sell it, indicating that this produce is designated for food, but not for commerce. And if it means that their wage is sacred with the sanctity of sabbatical year produce, is that wage in fact sacred? But isn't it taught in the Mishna that with regard to one who says to a laborer, here is this dinar I give to you, and gather for me vegetables today, his wage is permitted. But if he says to him, gather for me vegetables today for its value, his wage is forbidden. And the case of the donkey drivers is clearly similar to the former case, where the value of the dinar was not mentioned. And Abaye said, actually, Rabbi Yochanan's statement should be interpreted as saying that we give him his wage from sabbatical year produce, and as for that which appears to pose a difficulty for you, that the verse designates such produce for food but not for commerce, that can be resolved by explaining that one gives him his wage in a permitted manner, i.e. as a gift rather than as a wage. And this is as we learned in a Mishnah, that a person should not say to another, bring this produce designated as second tithe to Jerusalem from me in exchange for a share of the produce of which you may partake in Jerusalem, because this is considered payment and is tantamount to conducting commerce with the second tithe, which you can't do. Second tithe, right, when we're tithing, the temple is standing in Israel, we're doing the full tithing process. The second tithe in the first, second, fourth, and fifth years of the 7-year cycle serves only one purpose. It's to fund and feed you when you make your pilgrimage to Jerusalem for the regalim, for the 3 holidays, Passover, Sukkot, and Shavuos. Right? You can sell second tithe produce, transfer its sanctity to money because you don't want to carry watermelons all the way to Jerusalem with you. So you can transfer that sanctity to money, but that money can only be used for you to eat and drink when you're in Jerusalem during your pilgrimage. So what they're saying, so what you can't do with that money that you exchange your second tithe produce for, you can't use it to pay someone's wage, right? It's consecrated and not available for that. But he may say to him, bring it to Jerusalem to eat it and drink it in Jerusalem, as long as he does not specify that it is payment. And once in Jerusalem, they may give one another unrequited gifts. This indicates that what may not be given as payment may be given as a gift, and therefore the donkey drivers may be compensated with sabbatical year produce. And Rava says, actually, Rabbi Yochanan means that the produce with which the drivers are paid is sacred, with the sanctity of sabbatical year produce. And as for that which poses a difficulty for you, with regard to the law of the laborer cited in the Mishnah, which states that his wage is not sacred, that difficulty can be resolved as follows. There is a distinction between a laborer whose wage is not great, and therefore the sages did not penalize him by decreeing that his wage is sacred, and donkey drivers, whose wages are great, and therefore the sages penalize them. And with regard to the Mishnah that deems forbidden even the laborer's wage, in the case of one who produces wine designated for libation, the stringency of wine used for a libation is different, and it is treated more stringently than sabbatical year produce. I'm almost done. Questions or comments? Please get them in now. A dilemma was raised before the sages. If a Gentile hired a Jew to work with him in the production of nondescript wine of Gentiles. Nondescript wine is the adjective we're going to be using here to distinguish the wine of Gentiles that is not used for idolatrous libations from the wine of Gentiles that is used for idolatrous libations. So if a Gentile hired a Jew to work with him in the production of nondescript wine, what is the law? Do we say that since the prohibition of deriving benefit from nondescript wine of Gentiles is as stringent as the prohibition of deriving benefit from wine used for a libation, an idolatrous libation, so then his wage is also forbidden. Or perhaps should it be reasoned that since the law with regard to its capacity for imparting tuma, ritual impurity, to one who comes into contact with it is more lenient than the law with regard to wine used for a libation, therefore the law with regard to its wage is also more lenient. Right? So what we're seeing here is the wine of Gentiles is absolutely prohibited for Jews. As we'll see, there's been a slight easing of that law in modern times, right? So we can only drink kosher wine, but can we buy or sell or gift a bottle of non-kosher wine? Seems like that would be allowed in modern times. In ancient times, when all the Gentiles around us were idolaters, quite likely to be immersed in idolatry, and particularly offering wine libations to their idols, all of the wine of Gentiles was absolutely prohibited, not only for consumption, but also for benefit to the Jews. What they're asking here is, well, what if you know for a fact that it wasn't used for a libation, it wasn't produced in order to be used as a libation? Does that mean that we're going to be a little less stringent with it or not? That's basically the question. Come in here a resolution. It is related that there was a certain man who rented out his ship for transporting nondescript wine of Gentiles, and the Gentiles gave him wheat in payment. So he came before Rav Chisda to determine the status of the wheat. And Rav Chisda said to him, go burn it and bury it in a graveyard. So evidently, payment for working with nondescript wine of Gentiles is entirely forbidden, just as if it was wine that possibly or definitely was used for libations. The Gemara raised an objection to the method of eradication of the wheat in Rav Chisda's ruling. But let him say to the ship owner, scatter it. And the Gemara responds, if he scatters it, people might be caused a mishap by it, right? Meaning, if they find kernels of the scattered wheat and gather them for eating, right? In other words, if another Jew sees that this wheat was thrown out and there's like a pile of wheat sitting there, right? Hopefully people aren't so poor today that if you found a pile of wheat on the ground, you'd gather it up. But you know what? There's a lot of poor people in the world, and probably they would. And back then, especially even Jews, could be so poor and really needing the food. So if there was a pile of wheat on the ground, they might pick it up. Why was that pile of wheat left there? Because it was given in exchange for the wine of the Gentiles. That's what made the wheat prohibited. And so lest we create a stumbling block before the blind, right? Lest we leave prohibited wheat out somewhere where a Jew could encounter it and come to eat it and benefit from it, it has to be destroyed. So the Gemara challenges this disposition of it. But then let him burn it and scatter it. Why should it be buried? If it's burnt, no one's going to use it, get any benefit from it then. But the Gemara answers, well, perhaps people will fertilize their fields with it. Burnt wheat might be good fertilizer. So the Gemara challenges, but let him bury the wheat in its unadulterated form. Let him bury it. Okay, then no one's going to get it. Why do we have to burn it and bury it? Didn't we learn in a Baraisa with regard to the instruments used for imposing capital punishment that the stone with which a condemned person is stoned, and the tree on which his corpse is hung after his execution, and the sword with which a person is executed if that's his death penalty, and the scarf with which somebody is strangled if that's his particular death penalty, all of them are buried together with him, as it is prohibited to derive benefit from them. But the Baraisa, talking about, right, the gallows, the sword, the scarf, the instruments of execution that a Jew might be executed by if he received a death penalty, right? So, and the point being that, somebody who is executed, it's like his death atones for him, and he goes, he's not going to have a great portion in the next world if he received the death penalty, but at least he went through the death penalty. But the point is that we are not permitted to benefit from the articles that are used to execute somebody with a death penalty, right? So the sword that the executioner uses to decapitate somebody whose death penalty is decapitation, then that sword can never be used again. And we bury it with the one who was beheaded by it. So the question is, if burying is enough for this prohibited object, this sword that was used in an execution, but we don't have to melt it down and then bury it, why this wheat that was exchanged for idolatrous wine, why is it that we have to both burn it and bury it? And the Gemara answers, since they are buried in the court graveyard, right, where people receive the death penalty, they get buried where other people were buried who received the death penalty. So the matter is clear to everybody that these people were executed by the court, and so everyone knows that using the instruments of execution is prohibited. But here, the matter is not clear to everybody, as one might say to himself that a person stole the wheat and brought it and buried it here, and then he might thereby come to use it, right? He sees somebody bury the wheat, somebody witnesses that, the guy leaves, and then this guy says, wow, he just buried like 10 bushels of wheat. I'm going to go dig that up, separate the part that has dirt in it, and get some wheat. So just to make sure that that doesn't happen, that stumbling block before the blind, we have to both burn and bury this wheat that was exchanged for the wine of Gentiles, even though it was nondescript wine. That's how stringent the prohibition is on the wine of Gentiles, because in the ancient world, it was so often used for idolatry. Like I said, there is some easing of that law in modern times, but before you get involved buying and selling the wine of Gentiles, consult with your local Orthodox rabbi. Okay, that's what I've got for us today. Let me see if there's any questions that I can take quickly. On Avoda Zara 62, we'll just scan. I'm not seeing questions. And therefore, Ilanit says, conversion candidates study these laws in depth for reasons not the least to protect their Jewish hosts from error, when many Jews today have not learned much of this themselves. I guess in terms of sort of, especially a convert, because they're leaving the world of the Gentiles and entering the realm of the Jews, they have to know about these kinds of separations, just so. That's what I've got for us today, and with God's help, we'll see tomorrow night after Shabbos ends. I think last week I got on about a little after 9:30, and we'll aim for even closer to 9:30 p.m. Pacific tomorrow night. All the best. Good Shabbos. May we enter Shabbos hearing only good news and a feeling of great peace descend on us during Shabbos. We should be refreshed, and may we emerge from Shabbos to hear only good news. All the best. Good Shabbos.